When their plane's engines completely failed, 147 passengers were minutes from death. The cockpit went silent, oxygen masks dropped, and everyone thought they were going to die, until a passenger stood up and said 4 words that changed everything. "I can fix this." The woman they all ignored in seat 14C had a secret that would save every single life on board. Welcome to Stories of Black Lives. Before we dive into these powerful stories of respect, justice, and hope, please let us know in the comments which country you're watching from today. If you'd like to see more stories like this, hit this subscribe button. Please don't forget to like our video. It started with nothing out of the ordinary. Flight 192 from Atlanta to Charlotte had taken off right on time. The air was clear and the ride was smooth at first. No turbulence, no signs of trouble, just the usual announcements from the cockpit. A cart rolling down the aisle with half-warm drinks and passengers quietly scrolling through their phones or flipping through magazines they didn't really want to read. Zara Blackwood sat in seat 14C, right over the wing, middle seat. She didn't care for it, but she wasn't one to fuss. She had been bumped off her earlier flight due to overbooking, and this was the next one out. She accepted it like she accepted most things, quietly, calmly, just like she'd learned to do over the years. She was dressed in dark jeans, sneakers, and a soft green pullover. Her hair, pulled back into a neat bun, didn't attract attention. Nothing about her did. She liked it that way. The man to her left kept adjusting his seat, grumbling about legroom. The teenager on her right had earbuds in and was watching something on his phone, chuckling at the screen. Neither of them seemed to notice her. Most people didn't. That was fine. Zara wasn't flying for work. She wasn't speaking at a conference, teaching a class, or meeting a board of directors. She was just going to visit her mother in Durham. Her mother had called last week, sounding weaker than usual. "Come soon if you can," she'd said. So Zara booked the flight and packed light. She carried a backpack and a purse, both tucked carefully beneath the seat in front of her. She pulled out a crossword puzzle book and a pen from her bag and started working through the clues, quietly chewing a mint as the engines hummed along. Row 14 was just behind the wing, close enough that she could hear the mechanical rhythm of the flaps when they shifted. Most people couldn't pick up the subtle change in pitch when the engines adjusted for altitude, but she could. She always had. That came from years in the Air Force. Most people on this flight had no idea she'd once been a flight systems engineer running diagnostics on aircraft so complex they required 3 manuals just to run pre-checks. Now she taught at Heritage Technical Institute in Richmond. Nothing fancy, just engineering students trying to get through thermodynamics and senior projects. She never told people about her background unless she had to. It wasn't that she was hiding anything. She just learned a long time ago that people looked at you different when they found out you used to fix jets, or that you'd logged time inside a flight simulator more advanced than most regional pilots ever touched. But all of that felt far away. She wasn't Dr. Blackwood on this flight. She was just another passenger trying to get from one place to another. She glanced out the window. The sun was starting to dip. Golden hour. The wing gleamed against the orange sky. Somewhere below them, fields stretched wide across North Carolina, flat and open. You could see for miles out here. The plane hit a small bump, a dip. Nothing serious. Zara barely blinked, but she noticed the flicker in the overhead lights. She looked up. One flicker, then a second, then everything settled again. Most of the passengers didn't even react. Maybe they thought it was turbulence or a slight hiccup. It was easy to miss, but Zara's eyes stayed on the cabin ceiling because something about the timing didn't sit right. The lights flickered again. The engine pitch wavered just slightly. She felt it in her chest before she even heard it. Then came the jolt, but what happened next would silence every voice on that plane in an instant. The plane dropped fast. Not a slow descent, not turbulence. This was different. Like gravity yanked it by the nose. A collective gasp rushed through the cabin. Trays clattered, drinks spilled. A few passengers screamed. Zara gripped the armrest. Her body instinctively pressed back against the seat as her mind scrambled to match the feeling with the mechanical possibilities. This wasn't normal. Not at this altitude. Not with this kind of dip. Then darkness. For 2 full seconds, everything went black. The lights, the screens, the whir of the fans, all gone. Then the emergency lights kicked in, flickering weakly along the aisle in a dull red-orange, like a backup generator trying to decide if it wanted to live or die. Zara leaned forward, pressing her hand against the seat in front of her. The teenager next to her yanked out his earbuds and sat bolt upright. The man on her left cursed and clutched the armrest with both hands. Then the masks dropped. Every row. A cold clatter as the yellow cups swung down in unison, bouncing slightly from the sudden lurch. Some passengers screamed, others fumbled, trying to remember what to do. A woman across the aisle was already sobbing, hands shaking so badly she couldn't pull the elastic band over her head. Zara reached for her mask and slipped it on smoothly. She looked up. The lights above weren't flickering anymore. They were dead. The engine hum was gone, replaced by a strange whooshing sound she knew too well. It was the sound of an aircraft gliding. Not flying, gliding. That meant the engines were off. No thrust, no lift control, no hydraulic assistance. Her mind raced. In an aircraft like this, probably a twin-engine regional jet, that meant something massive had failed. Possibly electrical, possibly worse. A flight attendant, tall and jittery, stumbled into the aisle and tried to speak. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm. Please pull down on your oxygen masks and breathe normally." Her voice cracked mid-sentence. Her hands were trembling. Zara watched her closely, not because of panic, but because of what she said next. "There has been a systems error. The captain and first officer are assessing." Her radio crackled. She turned toward the cockpit, trying to get a message through. Zara strained to listen. The radio crackled again, then broke into what sounded like muffled shouting. Not panic, but stress. Words she could barely make out. Rudder not responding. Controls dead. Hydraulics. Check hydraulic line 3. Zara's heart pounded. That wasn't good. Not just a failure, a full system shutdown. And now they were talking about rudder control being gone. That meant flight surfaces were unresponsive. They weren't just losing altitude. They were flying blind. She reached under the seat, pulled out her backpack, and unzipped the front pocket. She pulled out a pen and small notepad. Her fingers started jotting down what she'd heard. She'd done this before, not on a commercial jet, but in war zones, in desert hangars where aircraft went up, not knowing what they'd come back down as. The man beside her looked over, confused. What are you doing?" "Listening," she said simply. "To what?" "To the things they're not saying out loud." He blinked at her. She didn't offer more. She didn't have time. Her eyes scanned the overhead panel. She watched the flight attendant again as she received another garbled message. The attendant turned back toward the cabin and began moving up the aisle, trying to stay composed, but her face gave away the truth. She didn't know what to do next. Zara glanced down the aisle. Passengers were panicking. One woman was praying out loud. A man further back was on the phone, leaving what sounded like a goodbye message. A child somewhere near the back was screaming for her mom. The entire plane was in emotional freefall, and they hadn't even hit the ground. But Zara wasn't watching them anymore. She was watching the cockpit door because it hadn't opened. And in this kind of failure, with this level of risk, the pilots should have made a cabin announcement by now. At the very least, reassured the passengers. But it had been radio silence, which meant either they were locked in damage control or they were in over their heads. But someone needed to speak up before the whole plane gave up. Zara unbuckled her seatbelt. The seatbelt sign was still lit, of course, but that didn't matter anymore. The plane wasn't bouncing. It was sinking, steady, like something heavy had given up trying to fly. Passengers gasped as she stood. "Ma'am, please sit down," the flight attendant called out, already rushing toward her. "I need to speak to the captain," Zara said, firm but calm. We're handling it." "You're not," Zara interrupted. "If the rudder's unresponsive and the backup hydraulics aren't kicking in, they're losing surface control. If they're still gliding at this altitude, they've got about 10 minutes, maybe less, before they have to ditch or land somewhere. They won't have time to troubleshoot both." The attendant froze. Zara looked her in the eyes, not angry, not scared, just clear. "I'm a former Air Force flight systems engineer. I used to teach emergency protocols for this exact type of multi-system failure. I know what's happening. I can help." The flight attendant stared for a moment, torn between protocol and the obvious. Then she nodded just once and turned toward the cockpit. The man in 14A leaned back, eyes wide. "Wait, are you serious?" Zara didn't answer him. Her eyes followed the attendant. The cockpit door cracked open after a tense 30 seconds. That was already too long. The attendant spoke to the captain, her voice low but fast. The door opened wider. The pilot stepped out halfway, eyes scanning the aisle like he wasn't even sure what he was looking for. Which one is she? The attendant pointed. Zara stepped forward. The pilot was younger than she expected, maybe late 30s, with tired eyes and sweat beading along his forehead. You said you worked flight systems? 15 years Air Force. I've written training protocols for cascade failures like this. He blinked. What are you doing in coach? Zara gave a tight smile. Just trying to get home. He looked back toward the cockpit, then stepped aside. Come in. Inside, it was worse than she expected. The co-pilot had his headset half off, fiddling with switches that clearly weren't responding. One of the screens had gone black entirely. Another was showing erratic data. Altitude readings were jumping, and none of the manual control feedback was registering. Full power loss. Yeah, it started about 12 minutes ago. We lost redundancy across the hydraulic lines. Some kind of electrical surge tripped half the board. APU, she asked. Offline won't reset. Zara leaned over and examined the side panel. Did you check the secondary bus switch for bleed air override? The co-pilot looked at her like she'd spoken another language. We didn't. We were trying to restart through the backup generator, but the power loop's not responding. She nodded. That's why your rudder's gone. If the pressure valves are stuck open, you're bleeding off everything through line 3 and nothing's getting to the tail. She moved to the panel, careful not to touch anything without asking. May I? The captain hesitated, then nodded. Zara reached down and toggled 2 switches, then flicked a third one, then paused. Try your rudder pedals now. Just a little pressure. The captain did. His eyebrows shot up. It's responding, barely. It'll hold long enough to get you level, but you need to pick a landing site now. You're gliding, and you've got about 80 miles left in this airframe before gravity finishes the job. The co-pilot started checking altimeter data again. There's an old strip near Millfield. Emergency use only, but it's listed. Zara nodded. That'll work. You'll need to do a long, wide loop to approach from the west. Keep the turn shallow. You don't have the yaw for anything sharp. The captain exhaled hard. You just saved this plane. Zara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Outside the cockpit, the passengers were still scared, still confused, still clinging to armrests and prayer. They had no idea the woman in row 14C had just corrected a flight path the pilots didn't even know how to fix. But saving the plane was only the beginning. The real test was getting it on the ground. Zara stayed in the cockpit, standing just behind the captain and co-pilot. The door was now locked again per protocol. The air felt warmer in here, stale, tense. Millfield airstrip is 70 miles out, the co-pilot said. We're at 28,000 feet and falling steady. If we can hold glide speed. We won't, Zara interrupted gently. You've lost both thrust and hydraulic boost. You'll bleed speed trying to angle in. You've got maybe 60 miles, less if that crosswind picks up. The pilot glanced at her. You're thinking we dump weight. Too late for that. You can't get the landing gear doors open manually without bleed pressure. And gravity drop might only unlock one side. If one wheel's loose and the other isn't, you'll spin out. So, belly landing? He asked, voice low. She nodded once. You won't have a better option. The pilot leaned back, processing. The co-pilot turned to her. Why do you know all this? Zara offered a brief smile. Because I used to run failure simulations just like this. Only we didn't have 147 people sitting behind us when we made a mistake. The captain looked down at the controls. What would you do if you were in my seat? I'd stay off the radios, she said. You don't need the FAA trying to walk you through something they've only read about in a training binder. Focus on the glide path. Start a slow descent now. No sudden drops. The co-pilot started adjusting trim settings. We're going to have to go in blind on elevation. That old airstrip doesn't have approach lighting. Zara grabbed the small flashlight from the side panel and aimed it at the printed terrain map. You've got hills on the west and a flat field just beyond the strip. Aim long. If you overshoot, you're still alive. The captain stared at the map. Then he turned toward the cockpit phone and lifted the receiver. This is the captain speaking. I need your attention. His voice cracked through the plane's PA system. Behind the door, they could hear murmuring and shuffling as passengers froze to listen. We've experienced a system-wide power failure. We are currently gliding toward a backup airstrip in North Carolina. The situation is under control. Please stay seated and keep your oxygen masks on. I need everyone to remain calm. We will get through this together." He hung up and looked at Zara. "I meant that. I'm not trying to sound like a hero, but having you here, I'm not sure we'd still be in the air if you hadn't stood up." Zara nodded slowly, her voice quieter now. "You've still got one job left. Land this thing. Then you can thank me." They fell silent for a few moments. Then a knock came at the cockpit door. The flight attendant's voice followed. "She's asking for Dr. Blackwood." The captain looked confused. "I thought you were staying in here." "I need 10 seconds with someone," Zara said. "I'll be right back." He buzzed the lock. She stepped back into the cabin. The attendant led her halfway down the aisle to a panicked woman gripping her seat tray. Her daughter sat beside her, crying softly into a stuffed animal. "I didn't know who else to ask," the mother whispered. "They said you knew what was going on. Are we going to die?" Zara knelt down beside her. "No," she said softly. "We're not." The woman started crying harder, quietly. Zara reached across the aisle and took both her hands. "We're landing in less than 15 minutes. It's not going to be pretty, but it's going to be over fast. And you're going to walk off that plane with your daughter. You understand me?" The woman nodded. Zara stood and addressed the whole row. "Breathe slow. Stay low in your seat. The front of the plane will take the worst of it. You'll feel a hard hit when we touch down, and we might skid, but that's part of the plan." Someone 2 rows back asked, "Who are you?" Zara didn't answer that. She just said, "Put your mask back on and keep it tight." Then she turned and walked back to the cockpit. But as they began their descent, even Zara didn't know if her plan would actually hold. The descent began. Shallow, smooth, controlled. For now, the mountains near Millfield were growing larger in the cockpit windows. At first, they looked harmless, just part of the landscape. But as the plane sank lower and the horizon tilted ever so slightly, those same peaks started to feel much closer than they had any right to be. "Air speeds dropping faster than we thought," the co-pilot muttered, tapping on a screen that didn't respond. "I'm getting unreliable data." Zara leaned over. "You're gliding without thrust or gear. You're flying dead weight with people in it. Forget the screen. Feel the stick." The captain adjusted slowly, hands firm but deliberate. His knuckles were white. Zara tapped the terrain map again. "Remember, come in from the west. You've got a strip of flat land on the far side. If you drop too soon, you'll clip that ridge. If you wait too long, you'll overshoot the runway." The co-pilot nodded, but looked worried. "We overshoot, we die? If we undershoot, we die slower." Zara didn't blink. "Then don't miss." Out in the cabin, the mood had shifted from panic to frozen silence. Everyone knew they were low. You didn't need to be a pilot to feel the pressure building in your ears or to see the dirt roads and water tanks getting closer through the windows. A little girl somewhere up front was whispering the same phrase over and over. No one hushed her. It was something like a prayer. Maybe it was one. Back in the cockpit, Zara saw something that made her stomach tighten. A red light flashing beneath the secondary panel. "Fuel vapor pressure," she said aloud. "You've got fumes building in the left wing. That's from the residual suction near the shut-off valves. If that leaks during landing, it could ignite." The captain cursed under his breath. Zara pointed. "You need to keep the left wing up on touchdown. Tilt slightly. Come in on the right. But we'll tip." "I know." He paused. "How sure are you?" She met his eyes. "I'm not, but I've read 6 crash reports where they didn't try. Every one of them ended the same." The plane dipped slightly, then straightened. The co-pilot reached for the landing gear control. "We're coming in." Zara held her breath. He pulled the lever. Nothing. Manual release? Already tried. Zara shook her head. "Don't force it. We go belly down." The ground was rising now. Fast. Throttle dead. Flaps. No response. Zara looked out the front window and pointed. "There. That stretch just beyond the marker poles. Aim there." The captain locked his focus. The plane slid forward like a bird with broken wings. It wasn't flying. It was falling with grace. And then impact. The front of the fuselage hit hard, dragging against dirt and gravel and uneven patches of land. Sparks flew up from beneath them. Zara felt the plane twist slightly to the left. The right side dug in. The tail started to spin. Inside, passengers screamed. Seatbelts strained. A few oxygen masks snapped off their hooks. Something in the rear cabin broke loose and slammed into the aisle wall. Zara reached for the sidewall, braced. The captain fought the yoke. The nose bucked once. The tail swung again. And then silence. They were still. Dust filled the cockpit. Nobody moved for a moment. Then the co-pilot said shakily, Are we? Zara pressed a hand to her chest. Her heart was pounding. She turned and opened the cockpit door. The cabin behind her was pure chaos. Oxygen masks dangling, people sobbing, others sitting in complete shock. But they were alive. Every single one of them. She stepped out and raised her voice. We're down. You're okay, but we need to evacuate. Stay calm. Follow crew instructions. A few people clapped. Others just stared. A little boy near the back threw up into a paper bag. Zara turned back to the cockpit. We need to start the emergency release hatches. I can help. The pilot stared at her like he couldn't believe she was still standing. You just landed this plane, he whispered. No, Zara said. You did. I just reminded you how. But walking away from this wreckage was going to leave a mark deeper than any scar. Smoke hissed from the left wing. Zara was the first to step off the plane, guiding people out through the emergency hatch near the back, helping the elderly, cradling a crying child into her mother's arms. Her shoes crunched against rocks and dirt as the cabin slowly emptied behind her. The ground was rough, uneven, half covered in dry grass and sand. This was no airstrip. It was barely a landing zone, but it had been enough. Fire crews weren't there. There was no tower, just the echo of wind and the smell of overheated metal. Somewhere nearby, a siren wailed, maybe from a county fire unit that finally got pinged by the aircraft's emergency transponder. Zara took a few steps back, breathing hard. Her hands were shaking now, though they hadn't been before. Not in the cockpit. Not during the impact. Now they trembled. That's when the captain came out. His uniform shirt was stained with sweat. His left sleeve had torn near the elbow, but he looked straight at her. You didn't just help us, he said. You gave us a shot when we didn't know what to do. Zara didn't say anything. She didn't want applause. She didn't want a medal. She hadn't done this for praise. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. If you hadn't stood up, if you'd stayed quiet, we'd be dead. She looked over at the passengers gathering in small clumps, hugging each other, sobbing into phones. One woman sat cross-legged in the dirt, holding her child like she was afraid to let go. I wasn't supposed to be on this flight, Zara murmured. They bumped me off the earlier one. The captain smiled faintly. I think someone bumped you here for a reason. Zara looked up as the first fire truck bounced its way toward them over the dirt road. Behind it came an ambulance and a dusty sheriff's cruiser. The co-pilot came over with his headset still around his neck. News crews are already on it. FAA's been alerted. They're going to want a full report. Let them write whatever they want, Zara said. Just make sure they spell my name right if they insist on putting me in the papers. He chuckled. Dr. Zara Blackwood. They'll remember. By the time the buses arrived to transport the passengers to a community center nearby, Zara had faded into the background. She didn't pose for any photos. She didn't give a speech. But as she climbed onto the bus, a woman grabbed her hand. It was the same mother from the cabin, the one who couldn't get her mask on. Her daughter clung to her leg. I didn't know who you were, the woman whispered. I didn't know you were the one saving us. Zara nodded slowly. You didn't need to. You just needed to believe we'd land. The woman looked like she wanted to say more, but Zara gently squeezed her hand and kept walking. The bus was quiet as it pulled away. People were exhausted, numb. Some were whispering into phones. Others just stared out the window, watching the wreckage get smaller in the distance. Zara sat in the third row. She leaned her head against the glass and finally exhaled. 12 hours ago, she was just flying to see her mother. Now she was the reason 147 people were still breathing. The man who had been sitting beside her in 14A walked down the aisle and stopped at her row. I owe you an apology, he said. Back when you stood up, I thought you were crazy. She looked at him. I don't blame you. I think I'm going to go back to school, he said suddenly. Learn something real. I'm tired of sitting around pretending I know things when people like you actually do. She smiled gently. Then it was worth it. The rest of the ride was silent. No one played music. No one laughed. But there was a strange peace in that silence. Like everyone had agreed that life just felt different now. And maybe they wouldn't forget this. Not tomorrow. Not ever. But even after they got home, what Zara had done would ripple into lives far beyond that runway. It made the news. Of course it did. Unbelievable heroism on Flight 192. Professor steps in, saves doomed plane. Passenger with military background prevents catastrophe. Every headline had a different angle. Some got the details right. Most didn't. They showed grainy footage of the wrecked plane surrounded by dirt, emergency crews, and passengers wrapped in silver blankets. Some outlets called it a miracle. Others turned it into a debate about pilot training and system failures. But one thing kept showing up, her name. Dr. Zara Blackwood. Reporters camped outside Heritage Technical Institute in Richmond, where she taught. Students started referring to her office as Mission Control. Her email overflowed with messages, some grateful, some curious, some just strange. She answered none of them. Zara didn't want to be famous. She didn't even want to be interviewed. She just wanted to get back to her mother. And she did. 2 days later, after renting a car and driving quietly through southern North Carolina, Zara knocked on her mother's door in Durham. Her mother opened it slowly, already on her walker, already waiting. "Was that you I saw on the news?" she asked, voice raspy. Zara smiled. "Yeah." Her mother shook her head. "You always were too smart to sit in silence." They sat at the kitchen table, drank tea, watched the rain tap softly against the windows, and for the first time in years, Zara allowed herself to feel what she hadn't let come through on that plane. Fear. Not panic. Not the chaos of passengers screaming, but the heavy, slow fear of being responsible for lives you may not save. "I wasn't sure," she whispered. "I wasn't sure we'd make it." Her mother reached out and placed a hand over hers. "Doesn't matter," she said. "You stood up anyway." That night, Zara lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling, listening to the old radiator hum through the walls. No headlines, no buzzing phones, just quiet, the kind that comes after the storm. 3 weeks later, she returned to work. Her students stood when she entered the room. She waved them off. "Sit down. We've got work to do." One of the students raised a hand. "Professor Blackwood, is it true you landed a plane?" She didn't smile. She didn't joke. She just nodded. "Yeah, and I'm here to teach you how not to ever be in that situation." They listened differently now. Not because she was a hero, but because they saw what experience really looked like. What quiet strength meant. And maybe that was the real story. Zara didn't save the plane because she wanted credit. She didn't stand up to prove anything. She did it because she saw something broken and she knew how to fix it. In the months that followed, a few passengers reached out. One sent her a photo of their family at Christmas, writing, "We made it because you didn't wait for permission." A little girl mailed her a drawing, a woman with wings standing at the front of a plane, smiling. She hung it in her office right above her desk, not for anyone else, just as a reminder. Because sometimes the person you ignore, the one you don't think, don't notice, don't even really see, that's the one who will save your life. Zara Blackwood didn't look like a pilot. She wasn't wearing a badge. She didn't speak first, but she knew what to do when nobody else did, and she stood up anyway. If this story taught you something, remember this. Sometimes leadership doesn't sound like shouting. Sometimes courage looks like standing up when nobody's asking you to. So when it's your moment, don't wait for permission. Do the right thing.